Hi, I'm Omid Zufanun. This is a video tutorial that I made for you guys about how to approach practicing, performing, and learning the Guitar Octet that I wrote called Cascade. So there's also a practice recording that you'll get a chance to use, and I'll try to provide multiple versions in different tempos. The one that I've made so far is sort of the ideal tempo based on what's written into the score. So quarter note equals 100. It's definitely what I would consider to be for the more advanced groups, and it can certainly be done slower, quarter note equals 90, and still get great results. So let's dive right into it. Okay, the first opening phrase, I don't think there are any huge questions there. So guitar 1 and 2 start off, and then guitar 5 and 6 follow, just an octave lower basically. It should be kind of a scherzo-like feel, so a little bit playful, a little bit slippery and slidey because of all the chromatic stuff. But I'm going to jump ahead and talk a little bit about the chromatic material with the triplets that come in starting in measure 11, and talking about these chromatic descending triplets. So the main thing I would say is I would probably use a sliding first finger, shifting constantly, rather than trying to do triplets in one position and then shift and then do triplets in the next position with all fingers involved. That could be a very useful exercise, but it'll probably be harder to achieve really evenness. And remember, we're not trying to phrase anything here. This is totally an effect, and the most important thing is to just make sure the triplets remain even. So that they have a round quality and that they don't end up being... There's a tendency with hammer-on pull-offs to sort of make them too fast, which will make them lopsided in terms of the effect we want here. So that kind of effect is what we want. Okay, so on to the rolled chords in measure 16. So here I would use your thumb. It's marked already with a P for thumb. And I would make them very strong. Think more flamenco and Led Zeppelin than Segovia and Fernando Sor. So starting with, say, guitar 8, you can either do this with a bar, and then go to the next chord, or you could finger it 1 and 2. Now guitar 7, you do 2 and 3 going to 4 and 1, and then the upper parts, same idea. Make sure in the upper parts that you actually respect the ties so that you don't create offbeats that then cut off with rests at the beginning of the bar whenever the people on the downbeat play. So actually connect the notes. But again, even the top parts should have a strong rolled chord with the thumb. That type of sound. Now, in measure 21, we get the first time that we have a asymmetrical meter. So we're here in 5/8, and I would think of these as groups of 2 plus 3. It's not marked that way in the score, but it's definitely musically organized as 2 8th notes plus 3 8th notes. All the 5/8 bars tend to be that way. The 7/8 bar that follows is also 2 plus 2 plus 3. So that can help you sort of organize it, and feel free to pencil that into your parts above the notes so that you have a sense that it's not just a bunch of random 8th notes, but that they are actually grouped musically. If you look at the bass line there, it kind of gives you a hint of how that goes, as well as the melody. So I would practice this for guitar 5. I would practice this first without any of the ornaments, just to sort of get the sense of how this goes. So if we're thinking 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, right? So 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, and then you get this run figure. Okay, and the run figure is obviously played by 3 guitars, 5, 6, and 7. guitars 5, 6, and 7. So let's go back now and talk about what the inner voice people are doing. This is guitars 6 and 7 on measures 21. So I would again think in terms of 2 plus 3, 2 plus 3, so on and so forth, and just think of your role as always coming on the offbeat or the second eighth note of each group. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and then you have your run. Okay? Guitar 7, exactly the same thing, just with different pitches. I think the bass line is clear enough what it does, so we're going to go ahead from there. Okay, in measure 28, guitars 4 and 5 have something that's a bit tricky. The reason it's tricky is because it kind of goes against the grain of what everyone else is doing. So you have a part that essentially is rhythmically a quarter note plus an eighth note, and it keeps that up for a while. If you keep up a quarter note plus an eighth note in 5/8, you're going to eventually run into problems because it won't line up with the bar. Here is a classic example of where you should ignore the conductor and ignore everyone else. I mean, listening obviously a little bit, but basically subdivide into the eighth notes and think quarter note plus eighth note and just keep that pattern up for the number of times it goes until you come out of it. It turns out that it goes quarter plus eighth once, twice, 3, 4 times until the pattern then comes out of it. So if we're thinking quarter eighth notes, it would be like this. Bum, 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 and then now we come out of it. And then we're arriving at measure 31. Okay, now in measure 37, the run for guitars 1 and 2 is very important, and it's tricky, but it's not tricky in any sort of unique way. The pitches are a little bit different than what you'd be maybe used to for a run, but like any run, it needs to be worked out carefully, slowly, with the shifts being the most challenging part, and it does start kind of high. The fingerings are given, but they're absolutely just a suggestion. If you or one of the teachers come up with a fingering that you like better, by all means, whatever makes it more fluid. Keep the run nice and strong all the way down to the top. I'm going to jump into now guitars 3 and 4 with some of their percussion effects. So guitar 3, you're using basically the side of the guitar with your nails because of where you're coming from. Because you're coming from an F sharp here, I would probably go to the side of the guitar here with your left hand and here on top of the guitar with your right hand. And they're sextuplets, but basically that just means 16th note triplets in this case. So you're going to go something like this. 1 and. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Okay? And the guitar 4 is doing the exact same thing, except that you're using your flattened out fingers on the face of the guitar. I would probably sort of flatten out your fingers enough that you can get a little bit of the bony part of the knuckle to hit so that you get a little bit more percussion sound. But the same idea, you're going middle, index, and then a left-hand finger. I use middle, but it really doesn't actually matter. And again, that's the effect. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And ideally do as much of a crescendo as you can. It's a bit tricky to get it rhythmically precise with the crescendo and all that. Guitar 7 and 8, very simple. On beat 3, you simply have eighth notes that lead into the next bar with a crescendo. Again, using the bony part of your finger, hitting the side of the thumb onto the actual bridge behind the strings. So let's jump to measure 38, and let's take a look at guitar 5 and 6. This is the melodic material, I guess you could call it, for this section. And the main thing here is the accent pattern. Okay, and in tempo it would be a little bit more like this. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the bass line here. So it tells you to do slaps. Just think of sort of an electric bass player and how they slap. It's the exact same technique that they use. that you hear all over Seinfeld episodes, for example. So you're going to use it at the side of your thumb. I keep my hand open. Some people like to close it like this. This is what bass players oftentimes do, but that's also because they want to hook their index finger underneath the other strings to not only slap, but then pop too. So here I actually like to keep my hand open, and you're trying to hit the string fairly close to the bridge and hard enough so that you get a little bit of a slap against the frets, which will give you a percussive effect. On the flip side, this reduces the amount of fundamental that you hear. In other words, the sort of warmth and thickness of the tone. You can make up for that by having one of the guitars slap and one guitar not slap. It's already divided out with guitar 7 and 8 doing the same part. And of course, if you're doing this with bigger groups, say with opportunity to do a lot of doubling, then you can start to listen and decide how much do you want maybe that type of sound and how much do you want that type of sound. Some kind of balance of the two would actually be good. So you get a nice full bass sound, but you also get the percussion. So this part, I would think of the eighth notes as the subdivision, and I wouldn't be too concerned about the whole 2 plus 3, 3 plus 2 stuff, because some of the other parts are doing things so different than that it could throw you off. What I would really think about is just practicing it slowly, subdividing eighth notes so that you're hearing it. You have a quarter note first that contains 2 eighth notes, so on and so forth. So the part would look something like this. If you're thinking eighth notes, tut, 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 tut. Okay, a little bit faster, that would look like this. Okay, and let me do it even faster so you can see what that would sound like. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about what Guitar 3 and 4 have, which is really my attempt at being able to imitate a little bit of scratching on a turntable. So this part is really best done if you take the right side edge of your thumbnail and you simply put it underneath the string like this, and then just slide it back and forth. So the reason you're using that side, of course, is not only does it sound really good on that side, but you know, if you scratch it up and it messes with the nail, you don't play on that side normally, so it won't hopefully affect the rest of your normal playing. So let's talk about the rhythm of that part. So if the groups, the guitars 3 and 4, just pay attention to what guitar 5 and 6 are doing. 5 and 6 always start out with 4/16 notes, and then the guitars 3 and 4 come in. So if you're thinking about guitars 5 and 6, they go. So if you're thinking like 1 E and that kind of subdivision, then the scratch comes in. So it's da ga 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 da ga. Okay, and then in tempo, da ga 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 da ga. Yeah, and try to keep it precise, but don't be overly concerned. The same way that scratching isn't, it's not a machine-like effect. So if you kind of go a little too far, or if you, like when you release, you heard when I did it, you heard some of the D, not a problem, not a big deal. But do try to get to have that kind of a little bit of a rhythmic flair going towards the last note. 59, if you look at guitars 5 through 8, there's some very tricky fingerings that need to be worked out there because of some of the jumps, particularly in guitar 8. But the material is, again, rhythmically exactly the same as the beginning melody. So what I would recommend is that everyone first learns the rhythm of it, including where the slurs are. So learn that as da da dia 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 da 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 dia 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 da da dia 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 bum bum bum. So if you get comfortable with counting that rhythm, then you can introduce the pitches and work it out. Basically, it's that melody harmonized to create new chords across 4 guitars. The upper parts are very simple. You're just doing repeated 16th notes. that start out unison on D and gradually become a cluster chord of D, E flat, E natural, and F, which gets very dissonant. So this whole thing should feel like it's getting more and more tense, more and more dissonant until it lands in measure 64 on your chord. Then again, we have this descending chromatic figure. Before it was in the upper guitars, now it's in the lower guitars, except now we have guitar 8 doing a rising chromatic figure against it in straight 16ths, while everyone else is doing triplet 16ths. If this proves to be challenging at all, the guitar 8 part, by all means feel free to eliminate the second 16th note of each group and simply play a rising chromatic figure. So if you look at the first note of each slurred pair of notes and get rid of the second one and just play the first one as an 8th note, what you end up with really starting from in measure 64, the F sharp, is simply a chromatic scale. You end up with starting from 64, 1 and 2, so on and so forth, going up until it gets all the way up to a G here and then lands. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the section titled slightly slower. That's basically just the tempo indication. This is measure 70. And this section should feel more relaxed. It should feel more sort of leisurely and lyrical and less terse and tense and jagged. There is a melody. It's guitar 1, and the melody is just... Okay? Very important that that comes through. So if we have bigger than groups of 8 people playing this, that's one thing to consider possibly doubling. And it's also something that everyone should be thinking about in terms of how to determine what their dynamics mean. You notice parts are marked pianissimo and all that. This is all relative. Dynamics are always relative, but think very much about that tune being heard, and whoever's playing it should use a nice rich rest stroke sound with plenty of vibrato and phrase it and all that. Your timekeeper through this section, since guitars 4 through 7 are doing some rather tricky syncopations, your timekeeper here is guitar 2 and guitar 3. Guitar 3 being a percussive timekeeper and guitar 2 being pitched. So guitar 2 here is going to do everything cross string. So you have an A and a G sharp starting it. So if we're thinking 1 and 2 and... Now I was doing M-I. You could also favor a finger plus one of, let's say, I plus thumb. I like that fingering. Just be careful if you do that you don't overemphasize the thumb, and then it goes up. So on and so forth. And you want to keep it ideally rhythmically very even, while doing swells and decrescendos, or otherwise what we refer to as hairpins. Okay, let's talk about guitar 3 now, this percussion effect. So basically you're going to use your right hand to slap the face of the guitar, left hand slaps the side of the guitar, and the right thumb then comes down and hits the low string, but kind of holds it down enough that it's going to hit the 19th fret and actually make a bit of a pitched sound too, ideally. So will work just fine if you just slap it and get a percussive effect, which that would sound like this. But it's even better if we can get a bit of sustain on that thumb sound. In other words, hold it down a little bit while you're going on with the pattern. So... and it almost gives the sound of... if any of you have heard in capoeira, the martial arts dance capoeira, the music that they play, they have this instrument called the berimbau, which looks like a bow from a bow and arrow with a long metal single string and then a body at the bottom, and they strike the string. And you get a bit of this type of buzzy, kind of wiry sound. So every guitar sounds a little different when it comes to that, so experiment and see what gets the best result there. Okay, so guitars 4 through 7 in this section at measure 70 have the syncopated pattern. So here we want to get a hairpin that is very expressive but very sort of warm and subtle. So if we're thinking 1 and 2 and, okay? And it continues with that idea. There's some places like in 76 where it should be louder because you take over some melodic material and so forth, but that's the basic idea. The bass kind of sets up every 2-bar chunk. So the bass line here is going 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, and 2 and 1 and 2. Okay? Okay, at measure 90, we have a kind of a echoing effect. It's almost like every bar is simply an echo of the previous bar getting softer. So you'll see there's a diminuendo in guitars 4 through 7. But in addition to doing an overall diminuendo, you should continue to do these hairpin swells within each bar. So 1, right? And then this melody can be nice and strong and nice and loud with the hairpin. And it's in octaves between guitar 4 and 7. Between guitars 4 and 6, right? So then the next 4 bars are the exact same material with some of the guitar parts an octave lower and at a lower dynamic. So there's a lot of sort of the sound of something fading away and echoing as it falls down here. Okay, so now we have this, the first, what I would say is a slightly tricky example of a metric modulation going from 97 to 98. So you notice that we have an indication in 98 that the previous 16th note equals the new triplet 8th note. Now let's explain what this means. So if we were going daka 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 daka, those 16th notes become the new triplet 8th note. So you basically grouping, instead of grouping 4 of those together, you're going to group 3 of those together to establish the new quarter note. So you have daka 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 1, 2, 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. Okay, that in and of itself isn't necessarily that hard. What makes it a little bit tricky is that the pattern that guitar 1 plays here isn't actually organized in groups of 3 notes in terms of where it repeats. It repeats kind of more after every group of 4 notes. So that's a little bit tricky because it means that you may be still thinking in the old pattern. So let me show you what I mean here. Let me just first of all play the pattern that guitar 1 has, and then guitar 8 comes in with as well. So this is at 98, and here's what guitar 1 has. Okay, so if you think about it, what's going on here is I have a pattern that's M-I-P-I. So that's what the right hand is doing. Naturally, we hear that as groups of 4 notes, but they're actually triplets. So what if I put the accents where the beginning of each beat is, this is what you would hear. Okay, so this presents a bit of a problem in terms of making sure that you're actually hearing triplets. As long as everybody knows that's what's going on and does a little bit of homework on it, then it's no problem. But otherwise, it'll be very difficult for those guitars that come in later to be counting the correct number of bars and all that. So it's really important to immediately orient yourself around this. Now let's talk about a few ways to actually practice this stuff, to do that. First of all, I would actually play the guitar 1 part, and I encourage the entire group to learn this. You don't have to learn how to play the whole section, but just learn this pattern. You're going to be basically going M-I-P-I. And I would learn to put accents every 3 notes like this. And I'm really exaggerating in an unmusical way, just to sort of really emphasize the idea that that's where the beat is. Now, then you can add the left hand, and at first I would pick one of the chords because the chord keeps changing back and forth, and just stick with that. So that until it becomes second nature, and in whatever tempo you want it in. So maybe a faster tempo like that. Eventually what you want to do is what's actually written there, which means that one of the patterns are played with the fourth finger on G, right? And then one of them is played with the second finger on F. So you have slower. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's one of those things that's really messes with your head at first when you do it, but it just becomes kind of programmed into you and you no longer think about it. It's not something you want to be analyzing once it comes to really putting it together with everyone else. So again, the transition into it is that we're coming from a section that's going daka 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 bum 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 da 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 da. And your bass line is very important, what comes in at 102, because it's establishing those quarters. So if we're going line here, so it's going to go. I'm letting some of the notes ring over extra too. You can play with that and see what you like. But basically that's guitar 7 at 102. So this entire section should be practiced in small chunks to master every sort of aspect of it before trying to add the next one. This is a good time to also mention to teachers and directors and conductors that this entire section coming up from 98 until we come back to the repeat of the beginning material, all of that can be done with a certain amount of liberty taken in terms of how many times you repeat a pattern before the next pattern is superimposed on top of it. So for example, at 98, guitar 1 plays a pattern for 2 bars, and then guitar 8 comes in with that pattern in the 3rd bar. Well, you could do the guitar 1 pattern twice as long, for example, and then bring in guitar 8. And then guitar 8's pattern that goes for 2 bars can go for 4 bars before coming in with the bass line at 102. I chose the most compact, simple, and concise version, but when I listened to the playback of it on the version that I made for you guys, it all flies by very quickly. It could easily be extended. I think it would be more fun if it was extended because it would allow you to sort of enjoy the groove of each pattern a little bit longer before adding the next one. So I'm going to leave that totally at the discretion of the music directors to decide how that's going to go. In your practice, I would recommend definitely doing that. Loop something for quite a while until you feel like it's super solid, then introduce the next element. And some of this stuff is the type of thing you'll want to pair up with someone and just loop your parts and see how they work together. Okay, moving along. So if we establish this tempo, the tricky thing is that now we have some things that come in that aren't based off of triplets, for example, at 106. So at 106, you have a melody here that's based off of straight eighth notes. So if we have here we have, so that's in a tempo of 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm playing it right now without the ornaments, but it would be more like this with the ornaments. Okay. Oops. Okay. So that in and of itself isn't super hard, but again, you have to be able to switch gears. So I would practice at looping it over and over again over the triplets until it becomes super easy. That's for guitars 2 and 5. Now the next bar, 107. This one's a little trickier. again, because of what's going on right before it. You have these straight eighth notes right before it, and now you need to switch back into a triplet feel, and quarter note triplets at that. So let's talk a little bit about how to play this. This is guitar 3, and then it's imitated octave lower by guitar 4 one bar later. So this rhythm, if we have triplets going da 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 da, and notice again I'm taking the ornaments out. In general, I would learn all of this stuff without ornaments first, because the ornaments have nothing to do with the primary rhythm, and the ornaments aren't particularly hard in and of themselves, but they could mess you up in terms of learning the rhythm. Okay, so one way to practice that pattern in measure 107 is to think of the triplets, the constant triplets, and map out basically where each note of your part, guitar 3 part, falls in that pattern of triplets, and accent those when you're practicing. So I would literally practice this as a drumming exercise first, to just get it into your body before you worry about the guitar. So if you're thinking, notice that since they're triplets, the first note of each pattern, of each group of 3 changes, whether it's right versus left. So that's going to play with the accents too. So now if I put the accents of your part in measure 107 into that pattern, it'll sound a little bit like this. It's going to be right, 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 left, right, left, 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 right, left, right, 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 left, right, left, 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 right, 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 left, right, left, left, left. Those are where they'd come. You can actually look at the triplets in one of the other parts and put little accents above where your notes would come to practice it that way as well. Okay, now we come to a little bit of a correction I need to give you guys. This is in measure 124. It's marked accelerando. That's wrong. This section, that next few bars, those next few bars should be actually a retardando. So starting in 124, please mark that retard. You're gradually doing a retard for 5 bars to then get into the next section at 129. I don't think there's anything that needs to be necessarily explained in the parts there, just that you need to slow down together. The triplets need to slow down together in those few bars. Now, transitioning seamlessly into 129, which is the same tempo of the beginning of the piece, there's a way to do that so that your triplet eighth notes in the previous section become the new eighth notes and the non-triplet eighth notes in 129 and have it be seamless. And so that modulation that you see at 129 where it says triplet eighth note equals new 16th is actually wrong. It should be triplet eighth note equals new eighth note. And I wouldn't worry too much about making that seamless though. If in doubt, what I would do is slow down almost to a halt, like really slow down at the end of say 128 with those triplets in guitar 8, and then just have a nice clear strong cue to come in nice and strong in 129 with the tempo that you started the piece at. So if you remember the material at, that's what this section is based off of. So what I just played there was guitar 1, answered by guitar 4, answered by guitar 7, answered by guitar 2. So it's basically 4 bars in a row where each of those guitars has a chance to play that part. And again, that's rhythmically based off of same idea there. Now, what we had during this section, during that section in the bass was, and that's exactly what we have for guitar 3 and guitar 6 here, only now it's not a bass line, it's a counter melody and it's not so aggressive. So on and so forth. Okay, so if you look at those parts, guitar 3 and 6, it's the same as. Okay, and then the bass line here is just constant quarter notes. The tricky thing about that is that since we're in 5/8, constant quarter notes goes across the bar line with ties. So what I would do for guitar 8 is listen to guitar 1. They establish the 16th note. So those 4 notes are what it takes to fill up one of your quarter notes. So if you're thinking daka 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 daka, so on and so forth. If you're thinking in terms of 16th notes filling out your quarter notes, it'll get you all the way through the section, and just don't pay too much attention to the meters and all of that. Don't worry about the ties. Just look at each pitch and think 16th notes filling it out, 4 of them. After that, you're basically home free. Measure 135, we're back to our beginning of the piece. All the material is exactly the same except for the very end. We'll briefly talk about that right now. The very end has an accelerando marked in, which you're just going to go a little bit faster if you can handle it, basically. And it's a bit of a race to the finish. And the last bar in guitars 3, 4, and 7 includes some Bartok pits, and 7 and 8 actually. So what is a Bartok pits? It's just a snap pits, meaning that you yank the string and let it slap nice and hard onto the thing. You'll notice that your parts kind of go right into that though. So some of you will have parts that'll make it hard to get over there, but so if you notice that that's what is what guitar 7 and 8 have. It's a little tricky to get under there, but it can be done. So if you have any questions, I look forward to hearing from you about them. You could feel free, not just teachers, but students as well. Feel free to contact me at my, just go to my website, omidzufanun.com, and there's a contact page. Just go ahead and fill that out. It'll send an email directly to me. I'd be happy to hear from you, even if you don't have a question, just to hear your comments about the piece. Since I am writing this for multiple school groups, any comments would be useful for me to know what you think of it, what you liked, what you didn't like, what works well, what doesn't work well, and maybe what you'd like to see more of in the future, because I'm going to be definitely writing more music for these types of guitar ensemble pieces. So I look forward to hearing from you, and of course, good luck with the piece.